To you.
Thank you, Don. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending my presentation about HF Mobile DXing, which will give you an introduction to working DX while operating from a mobile perspective. It will provide guidance about what DX means, installation of equipment, aspects of safety, importance of understanding propagation principles, optimum operating locations, and how to improve your position in the listings of the leading HF DX awards. I'm going to keep it simple. As the great man Albert Einstein said, everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. So let's start with the basics. DX. What is DX? Simply, it's the telegraphic abbreviation for distance. And DXing is two-way communications between distant stations. A DXer is a radio amateur making contacts over long distances or to rare stations that may not necessarily be that distant, as we've found in the last couple of weeks with the IOTA operation from Victoria Island, part of the Franz Josef Land archipelago, which isn't that distant from the UK, but I couldn't break the pylon. Sorry. So a de-expedition is an operation by radio amateurs to a needed place, such as a DXCC entity or an IOTA group. A DX club formed primarily for exchanging news about DX operations by means of websites, emails, journals and conventions. And DX news is published, such things as dx-world.com, virtually on a continual basis. Daily DX news, which is payable by subscription from the USA, and then free weekly publications such as 425 DX News from Italy and OPDX News from the States, as well as monthly features in such columns as HF in Radcom and How's DX in QST. There are, of course, other forms of DX, and I was following that recently on the motorway. And as they claim, if you want to be sure to get there on time, every time, then DX it. History of HF mobile DXing. Mobile operations have been allowed in the UK since June 1954. The first mobile rally was held the following year in Oxfordshire with less than 100 people attending. But today, this year, the Hamfests in Dayton in Ohio and Friedrichshafen in Germany attracted around 30,000 and 17,500 visitors respectively. The do's and don'ts of HF mobile DXing. Learn as much as you can about DXing before you begin operating. The location of your mobile DXing station must be optimal. Then listen before you decide to call the DX station, and indeed listen some more before actually calling. Learn about how your radio equipment works and learn about propagation principles. Learn about the DX station's operation and learn about pilot techniques. Now, it's not illegal to use a two-way radio, surprisingly, while driving, unlike using a mobile phone. However, it's your responsibility to maintain proper control of the vehicle, otherwise you may face prosecution. And in my opinion, the only way to safely operate DX mobile is to do it while the vehicle is stationary. And always suffix your call sign with /M. It works, believe me, in pileups. And remember that signing QRP in the UK conflicts with the terms of your license and shouldn't be used. So when you're fitting a HF transceiver in your vehicle, beware of connecting directly to the main battery, as it may drain the battery, but in modern day it's more likely that you may experience problems with engine management systems, central locking, lights. This has happened to me over the years, but about 5 years ago I had a car, particularly on 40 metres, it affected the engine management system big style. So since those days I've moved forward and use a leisure battery of 105 amp hours. The only drawback with that is you've got to carry it into the house, or if you've got a garage, connect it up in the garage to charge it. And ensure both leads from the battery are fused at the end nearest the battery with the correct current rating. I, about 6 months ago, actually touched the negative to the positive and thought I'd blown the rig. It was actually the negative fuse that blew and the rig was fine. Be aware of installing a transceiver in a new vehicle. If you, on the first page of most vehicle handbooks, it says you shouldn't do it. Last company car I had was a Hyundai, and I rang them up and didn't get a positive answer at all, because it said you should ask them about it, but they couldn't. They said speak to your local dealer. He couldn't tell me. So this is, but I've never had any problems with warranty that were due to putting a transceiver in a car. Important not to place the radio too close to airbags. For years I used to have the radio while I was driving, transceiver, on the passenger seat. Yeah, well, I'm not sure what would happen if the airbag went off and you've got a heavy piece of equipment on the passenger seat. Another drawback with that is that it's going to set the seatbelt alarm off in many instances. Be aware of all these things. Now, equipment for mobile DXing can be as inexpensive or expensive as you choose, and the more expensive receiver that you have, it's going to be a bit more effective during poor conditions, having better filters and interference reduction. But the most important factors isn't the transceiver, it's the choice of antenna and operating location. That shows my current setup in the car. I'm not saying that I do that every time I operate. Sometimes I do put the transceiver on the seat for a matter of speed. But if I'm going to be sitting there in a contest for any length of time, or if I'm going to be sitting there for a couple of hours trying to get through a pileup, I've got a two-stage workstation where the transceiver is sitting on the top. It's basically a wardrobe door cut in two, and the take the headrest out, and then I've got two bolts that go through there, and then the bottom section suspended by chains for the mic, Morse key, and the notepad. As far as the transceiver is concerned, most modern type rigs are menu driven and can be awfully fiddly when working DX. So I prefer a rig with knobs and buttons on more than having to delve into menus. And if you do have that type of rig, then only the important features such as power, filter settings, key speed, Vox gain, Vox delay, I feel are important. There may be others that you consider. And of late I've been doing a lot of work on data, which of course you need a laptop. So dispense with a notepad and put a computer there. And that also gives you the benefit that you can add your contacts directly into the logbook. The antenna is the most important piece of equipment for HF mobile operation. And obviously for mobile operation, the usual type is a vertical whip. But bearing in mind that a resonant quarter wave on 20 meters is actually 5 meters long and therefore impractical. So the solution is to use a coil and hence inductive loading. So one type of whip has different coils to change band with a single common element. Another type has single loading coil but with a clip or plug together with a lead to short out the unwanted section of the whip. There's then the continuously tunable type and electric motor to raise and lower the coil against contacts. But my preference is the helical type with wire wound on a fiberglass whip for monoband operation. I'll come on to more on that in a few seconds. Obviously, the coil must be designed to be resistant to rain and resilient to withstand movement due to handling and wind. And there's some good ones out there, there's some poor ones out there from the commercial point of view. And the whip forms half a dipole with the car and its capacitance to ground representing the other half. Therefore, it's important to maximise the efficiency of the antenna to provide a good ground plane to reduce any earth losses. The whip should provide a minimum SWR around the band's preferred DX frequencies. That may mean that on 40 meters, the other night I was listening to Craig from VK8 land, and I was hearing him, he wasn't hearing me, but I'd got a fairly high SWR, and that was because that whip is tuned for way down below 7.1 megs, and he was listening on 7.2, which didn't help us anyway, unless we were on 7.999999. And picking up on that, an ATU is not recommended due to the power loss that's likely to be occurred. So it's important that the whips that you've got are resonant for that band and for its DX frequencies, because it's DXing we're talking about here. That shows an antenna that I looked at, which is a multi-band antenna with the plug and leads that I mentioned. It worked fine, but it's very fiddly, that you had to have a table to know how long the whip had got to be and know where to put the plug in. So I prefer single band antennas. On an 80 meters I've got two, one for the CW end, one for the HF, one for the higher frequency part of the band for the SSB DXing. Now the whip can be mounted either on the boot, the tailgate, the roof rack, or the towing bar. But it's much better for the coil to be clear of the vehicle's roof. And the whip should be instantly available for use on the DX frequency at any time, hence the single band antennas that I prefer. Fixing the mount for the antenna, that's my current arrangement on a roof rack, which the mounting point for the coax is as far back as possible, because I needed to get an earth lead through to one of the hinge brackets inside the tailgate. When I first did this, we mounted the antenna there, and that extra 200-300 mil of earth wire became resident, and the SWR was all over the place. So the antenna should be earthed to the structure of the car, particularly as most modern vehicles have composite parts around that area of the body. And as I've said, the earth must be from the base of the antenna and to be kept as short as possible to reduce any inductive reactance. And using the type of mount that I do with an SO259 socket, then with the antennas in the main that I use that have got 3/8 bases, you may need to use a 3/8 to PL259 adapter. And feed with low loss coax, say fitted with a SO239, I think I said 259 before, 239 socket, complete with 300 mil PTFE pigtail to pass through the boot jamb before it goes into the main coax. So the mystery of power. There's about 20 decibels difference between 10 watts and a kilowatt, which is nearly 8 S units. And I hear the M3s, M6s calling, and if they're being true to their license and running 10 watts, they've got to bear in mind that they're going to be 8 S points down on the signal that they're hearing. And unfortunately, a lot of those guys just don't get through the DX pileups or even reach the DX if there's not a pileup. Difference between 100 watts and a kilowatt is 10 decibels, which is just more than 3 S points. And it's interesting in contests. In contests, people are going to give you 5.9 anyway, but if somebody's giving you a true report and that station's 5 and 9 with me, I'm getting 5 and 6 to 7s back, which is what's shown there. The difference between 100 watts and 200 watts, and I considered using a 200 watt amplifier in the car, but it's going to draw obviously more current out of your battery, and you're only going to get about 3 dB gain, which is only 1 S unit, and that's not going to be of any benefit to you most of the time, vast majority of the time. So DX propagation. HF DX communication occurs below 50 megahertz, where the refraction of the radio wave occurs in the ionosphere, returning the signal to Earth. And this signal may be reflected back to the ionosphere for a further hop or hops, depending on the distance around the world it's going. HF DX propagation and band conditions are affected by the sun, such as the 11-year solar cycle, current solar activity, time of year and time of day. Now the bad news. Predictions currently show that cycle 25 won't start until around 2020. So we're 3 years off that. And that's set to peak by 2025. I'm 68 at the time. At the moment, I'm going to be 75 in 2025. So I think I'm happy that I've seen the good days, because it gets worse. It's been predicted that the next maximum may be the weakest for about 100 years. And so what we've seen in the past, we're never going to see it as good again. The best DX propagation is around the time of the spring equinox, from mid-February to mid-April, and the autumn equinox from mid-August to around now. So we're about to start slipping into the winter doldrums. But I think the most important fact in all this is understanding grey line. And this propagation occurs around the Earth between sunrise and sunset. And during this time, the lower D layer of the ionosphere, which absorbs the signals, decays just after sunset, but yet has to build on the sunrise side. And the ionization of the F layer, which is what we're really interested in, and provides our DX propagation by refraction, is still in existence because of its higher altitude at about 300 to 400 kilometers. So it's much higher up, so the sun's still seeing that. And I know that where I operate from on the west coast, the sun's gone down, and you think, oh, this is great, this is sunset. It's not, because at the angle of takeoff for my signal is at what point over the Atlantic is it actually hitting the ionosphere. I haven't done the trigonometry, but so often it's after sunset, and then I get that contact, and I think it's because my signal's actually hit the sunrise over the Atlantic somewhere. That shows, courtesy of the RSGB, a grey line map at 0800 UTC on the winter solstice, and it shows the UK in grey line. So that would be a good time to be working the east coast of South America, west coast of Chile, round to North Island, New Zealand, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Solomon Islands. And a lot of people don't understand grey line at all, and that's what it's all about. This, I think you were there, I think you were there, Don, on this operation. It might have been you sending, but this is the 6Gs, E6GG operating from Nui in Central Pacific on 10 meg CW at 0800 UTC on the 26th of September 2015. If it'll play. Interesting bit. Record the pileup. Three attempts. Okay. Was that you?
No, I wasn't on that one actually.
Oh, you? Yeah. What I feel the other interesting part about that was recorded on my mobile phone while I was in the car. So around the time of grey line on the equinox, those are the signals that you can hear in a car with the right setup. So, solar terrestrial indices. The SFI, or the solar flux index, relates to the sun's total radio emissions, and a value of below 70, which we're at the moment, is poor, and above 100 is good. Ionospheric conditions are best when the A index, which is averaged over a 24-hour period and causes fading, is less than 6. And the K index, which is averaged over 3 hours and creates noise, is less than 3. And I looked yesterday, and I think the SFI was 68, the A index was 28, and the K index was 5. So, not the time to be on the air with a mobile whip anyway. And solar flares, which create radio blackout, and was probably, I haven't checked, but was the cause of what happened yesterday, are classified as X, M or C according to their X-ray strength, with X being 10 times greater than M and M being greater than C. And there was, I think about a couple of months ago, an X-class flare that was one of the strongest in many a year. Location. Don't operate your station from private property without the landowner's consent. And, as I've touched on, the ideal HF mobile DXing location, without a doubt, is close to saltwater. But obviously we're not all lucky enough to live near saltwater. So when operating inland, a moist hillside with a clear takeoff facing the required location provides radio reflection from that slope. I was speaking to Don earlier, and you're fine away from the slope, but over the top of the hill, it's always a struggle. But it's sometimes better to be on the slope than it is actually on the top of the hill. Location of the vehicle is very important in order to minimise band noise. So don't park near power lines, as they're likely to absorb some of the RF and create band noise. What time I'm on? I've got
15 minutes.
Yeah, better crack on. Be careful that the majority of locations where you're going to be parked are in public areas and present a physical and RF hazard to bystanders. The importance of listening. You're likely to be listening, DXing from a car, for about 95% of your time. Therefore, you need a lot of patience. And remember that the same rules apply when HF mobile DXing as from an average base station. But be aware of the plans of all the current and pending DXpeditions that you want to contact. Use the internet-based clusters for real-time DX and for the solar data. Be aware of the propagation to your required DX stations part of the world and their local time. It's no good trying to call somebody in the middle of the Pacific on 20 meters when it's 3 o'clock in the morning there. Over time, you'll learn to recognize the DX operators' dialects and language characteristics. When you find the DX station, spend some time listening before calling them. Are they working simplex? Or if you can't hear the stations that are working them, just as we had on that audio clip, they may be operating split frequency. So when chasing HF mobile DXing, inevitably you need some skilled operating techniques, especially when attempting to break pileups. And are they listening simplex or operating split frequency? Are they moving within their declared range? So if they're listening 5 to 15 up, are they listening on 5, 10 or 15, or are they tuning up between those limits? What's the time duration between QSOs? And are they allowing tail enders or only taking callers when making a QRZ call? Don't want to conflict with the DX code of conduct, but we must always know the rules that are laid down there. Call the station once with your full call sign using International Phonetic Alphabet, because the station you're calling may not speak that good English. He's going to know the International Phonetic Alphabet, but you know, Germany, if he's Spanish, it's Armenia, it's not Germany. So, and if the station's calling by number, then only call when it's the number in your call sign. And prefixes containing two numbers, such as 2 Echo 0, 9 Golf 5, I think only the first digit, I think, sorry, that the first digit shouldn't count. So if he's calling for zeros, you're okay. But if he's calling for twos and you've got a 2 Echo 0 call sign, I think you should keep quiet. Consider working in the major DX contests run by CQ Magazine, ARRL, RSGB, DARC, the German Society, as the competition may be less intense, particularly if it's a 48-hour contest. During that second day, it's less intense than the pilots for those expeditions when they're there by themselves. And in the major expeditions, which we've got coming up to places like Bouvet and Baker and Howland, got to be patient and wait until they've got at least, I think, 40,000 contests in their log before trying too hard, because you're not going to do it. Make friends with the big guns who may encourage DX operators to listen for the mobiles, and you may consider joining DX nets and lists. Now, traditionally, contacts have been verified on paper by a QSL card. QSL cards have existed since the 1920s, when broadcast station listeners sent reports, and also since the early days of amateurs they've been exchanged. Today it's more likely that contacts are verified using electronic methods such as LOTW, Club Log, EQSL. That's a card that I received from Radio Luxembourg. I just sent for the hell of it. I wasn't a broadcast shortwave listener, but I was a shortwave listener. It shows on 208 meters they were running 300 kilowatts. Wow, you still couldn't hear them in the UK before 7 o'clock at night. And but the important thing is, although the transmitters were situated in the Grand Duchy, the card actually came from central London. I must have used a threepenny stamp. Before QSLing, check on qrz.com or Hamcall to see the QSL route, and if the station has a QSL manager. The operator or manager might prefer to QSL directly by mail or via the bureau or through LOTW. If possible, use Club Log and OQRS to request direct cards paying via PayPal or for free receipt of bureau cards. Get involved in the countless awards that can be achieved, which are administered by radio society clubs and organisations throughout the world, such as DXCC by ARRL, WPX by CQ Magazine, and Islands on the Air by IOTA Limited. And you may wish to target DXCC awards such as the Basic DXCC, 5-band DXCC, DXCC Challenge, DXCC Honour Roll, and indeed getting to #1 Honour Roll. Some further reading I recommend is the Amateur Radio Mobile Handbook by Peter Dodd, G3LDO. HF SSB DX Basics by Steve TL, PJ4DX. And Radio Propagation Principles and Practice by Ian Paul, G3YWX. All these books published via RSGB. So the odd one out. You know which the odd one out is? I told you this morning. Anybody else? The odd one out?
B5.
No. Lee's not saying anything because he knows. Those are the top 5 in the latest club log DXCC Most Wanted Entity, North Korea. Bouvet Island in the South Atlantic, which I've mentioned, is coming up next year, 2018. Crozet, which has kind of disappeared off the map. It's in the Indian Ocean. It's a French owned island, but since the weathermen aren't radio hams anymore, it's very very rare. Baker and Howland in the Central Pacific, that's coming up next year. Scarborough Reef sitting at number 5 with all the politics of actually getting there. That's the only one on the current DXCC list that I haven't worked from the car. So I've got the badge, number 1 honour roll, -1. I have worked Scarborough Reef, but it was from our club station with G4 NXG. Quite legitimate for the award, but I've got to live long enough to get the next Scarborough Reef operation into the log from the car. If they'd have gone for 2 weeks, I think I'd have done it, but the pile-ups were massive, and I sat there 2 sessions of 4 hours, and Marty Lane twice said the mobile go ahead. I'll never know whether it was me, but he didn't give me a second chance. So finally, be patient and don't be too disappointed if the band changes and you don't get them. You may well get a further chance in the future. And my wife wrote the last one. So, thank you. And before I ask for any questions, I've got to put a plug in for this book, which is fresh from the press, kind of. The RSGB have sold out. They're waiting for a further supply, so it's not available here today, but it is available online. It's the funniest book I've ever read. Not that I've read that many funny books about. The owl is okay. The trials and tribulations of a radio am and a DXer. And the author is sitting in this room at the moment. Well, I won't point him out and embarrass him, but he's got a pink shirt on and a walking stick. So, but that's a must buy. Any questions?
Yes.
Yeah, a couple of things that I thought you might mention. You said don't use ATUs, but one of the things I've noticed and I've found I need to use is I need to get an impedance transformer to really get the effectiveness out of the error. So I use a bit of a coil toroid to actually match it up from a very low impedance down to some approximately to 50 ohms. And I don't know if you've got any experience. And the second thing is with leisure batteries, they run at about 12 volts or so, and my rig, probably like a lot of other people's Japanese, 13.8 optimum. Down towards 12 volt, the transmitter drops down, they get instabilities and things like that when you're getting a bit old. Have you got any
Instabilities, and I've got no problem with 100 watts going out. I will say I've had a problem recently, and it was the HT lead. It was probably the fuse in the HT lead. I've gone back to rather than a proprietary HT lead, I've gone back to one that I built, and it's got rid of the problem. The leisure battery, for years I connected directly to the battery of the car, and I had more problem with voltage loss there, unless I started the engine, than I have done with a leisure battery. But there was another point to your question. About the antenna, the SWR. I ran for years an ICOM 735. In fact, I had 2 of them. No built-in ATU. Didn't have a a separate ATU. Of late I use a 590 which has got the ATU, and I'm not saying that I don't put the ATU in, but the point I'm making there is make sure your whip is resident. So if you're going to be chasing it on 20 metre CW down on 7020, it's no good having a whip that's resident on the iota frequency like 14260. 20 metres is fairly broadband. You try that on 40, as I was trying the other night, and you're at a complete loss. 80, forget it, top band. You have to keep going out the car, even 5 kcs, you've got to adjust the antenna.
I agree. The whip's got to be resonant.
Yeah.
I found that by putting the impedance transformer
Yeah.
it stepped it up and down.
Yeah.
I got a little bit more out of it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is my icon rig. I put the battery, there's a battery right up by the rig,
Mm.
only leaving a couple of fuses there.
Mm.
It's made a bit of a difference, but I did find one of these MFJ devices which picks you up a voltage,
Yeah.
like 1 or 2 volts, made a little bit of difference on receive stability, but on transmit it made my 100 watts was pretty good all the way through the life of the battery.
Yeah.
How many hours before you recharge?
You have to remember, or you have to know that as far as electrics and electronics, I know very little. Despite being a shortwave listener from 1960 and being an amateur for 30 odd years, 35, 36, 37, my electrical knowledge is limited. I qualified as a mechanical engineer, so when people start talking about inductance and inductive reactance and all these magic things that if you're from an electronic background, oh sorry Nigel, you're going to ask me something really involved about electronics now, aren't you?
Very interesting presentation. I think it was me on that E6GG on 30 metres.
So I didn't recognise your recognise your dialect on the key. Yeah.
What I wanted to say was it's slightly controversial. I think it's very good when you operate stroke M. When you're at the other end of the pile-up, you have people sending stroke P. It really pisses people in piles off because you don't like people using that. But when you hear someone stroke M, most people present go bonkers to try and get the guy through, and probably Don would agree as well. People signing stroke P don't do themselves any favour in pile-up. They mess things around anyway. But if you're signing stroke M, you'll have a little bit of extra push, and I think it can be very helpful.
And isn't QRP worse, particularly if it's from a guy in a mobile?
Well, yeah, it's not sending right. But if you've got the stroke M, use it sensibly. It will give you a little bit of an edge sometimes if you can't go in the week.
Yeah. I didn't want this presentation to be about me. I could have spoken for half an hour about what I've done, where I've done it, how I've done it. This, as I said from the outset, is to keep it simple. And it's, you know, it's for the people that want to get into HF mobile and have never done that. And yeah,
Yeah, I'd like to throw you the Norfolk one.
Yeah, I knew you would. Yeah, that's why I brought you with me. Yeah.
You know, you were talking a little bit earlier about your computer doing the login into your computer.
Yeah.
Right. What do you do when your computer locks up? Sometimes when I do a bit of portable or a little bit of, and I find Windows takes ages to actually load again. Right. So what do you do in that situation, especially when you're having a big pile-up time to call them, panicking?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you get around it?
I use a pen and paper.
One of these.
I use a pen and paper. Is this a catch question? Do you know the answer you're looking for? No. Well, for years. It's only since this year, literally this year. I've made over 2,000 contacts this year. Traditionally, I was making about 600 or 700 contacts, and I retired 2 years ago, so I've got the benefit of having more time now. But of the until 4 years ago, I was 100% sideband, and then Lee said, "You've got to try this CW." So I did, and I threw Nigel the first time I called him. He thought he doesn't do CW, but he came back and he gave me a report, so he must have realised it wasn't a pirate. And but of those 2,000 plus contacts this year, 500 are on CW, 63 are on sideband, and 1,500 are on data, which I'd done no data until this year at all. And Lee was saying, "Got to get onto data," and I started PSK 31. 63, a bit faster, 125, and Ritty, brilliant. And then 2 weeks ago, Lee said, you've got to try this FT8. Well, it's amazing when VP8LP calls you, you know, and you get a pile-up of JAs, and you can be working California when you can't hear Iceland, you know, and so I have a laptop in the car, but it's only this year I've been logging directly into a laptop. Before that, I was just destroying rainforests, yeah. Sorry, Glenn.
Alan, just to reiterate what you said, I really believe it. Listen, listen, listen. Very quickly, a couple of years ago, I was Clifford and Island was on, and there's only Frenchies over there. The French guys in the pile-up, and they were working split, like you've got to do a big thing like that. And you guys are on expeditions and so forth, up and down the band, and the operator gets bored. He's tired and he gets bored. And all of a sudden, this operator said, listening simplex. Out goes the second VFO, EW0 A&A. And the Frenchman said, GW0 A&A, you listen, 5-9. And that was it. And I got Clifford in because I listened. If he didn't listen, he was on simplex, and you get all the police screaming at you because you're on these transmit. But he did say, I'm listening simplex, and I got Clifford in the
I have to watch the time, but many years ago, Baker and Howland, first time round for me, and somebody, one of the local big guns, it wasn't Lee, said to the guy on Baker and Howland, he said, can you listen for the mobile? I think it was, is it Jackie, was it F2CW, is his name Jackie? And he said, the mobile, my frequency now. And he actually, and I realised what he'd done, worked him simplex, and he was at the HF convention the following year, and I said, why did you do that? He said, I wouldn't have heard you through the pilot. Yeah, so some, sorry, we must
wrap up.
Can I just have 1 minute? Some things that do stand out, if we start talking about what I've done, was years and years and years ago, I had an FT707 1 VFO, and it was VU7, Lacative Islands, which are on at the minute, but this was the first time they'd been on for way. And I was driving around the Chichester bypass, and I thought, I'll pull over, see if they're on. No DX cluster. It was the fact that Radcom had said, this expedition's going to be there. They were there, and he was transmitting on 14195, and he was listening 40 to 50 up. Ridiculous split. And I remember the frequency to this day, 14244.4. I went there and called him. And I did that for 20 minutes, and then he said, the mobile, go ahead. I said, you're also 59. I said, you're 5 and 9. Can you pause before you give me my report, please? Why, what's the problem? Yeah. Middle of Manchester one day, I talk about being on hills by saltwater, lowest part of Manchester, right down by the river in Manchester. Lunchtime, put the rig on. There was a guy from Guam on. I started calling, I thought, well, I don't need Guam. And I just tuned up the band, and I heard a guy, and all I heard was CQ, DX, Europe, and buy. And it, Arctic Flutter, I thought it was Hawaii, I thought it was a KH8. Somebody went back to him, and I called again, and he came back. He said, G4NXG Mobile, you're 5 and 9. And I said, what's your call sign? Tango 30, Bravo Charlie, West Kiribati. Wow. I've only ever worked it once, and that was it. Local language, local dialect. This is a long time ago. It was before I was married. We'd been to a rugby league match at St Helens, and driving out of the car, my wife said, I thought you were after that station. Wow. You know, I said, all right, jump in the back, put the rig on the passenger seat, and went to the frequency. Two guys talking in an Eastern European language. I didn't know what it was, but I thought the guy's on Cambodia, Hungarian. And he said goodbye to the other guy after they'd rabbited on. And I said, Golf 4 November X-Ray Golf Mobile. He said, yeah, G4NXG Mobile, you're 5'9", X-Ray Uniform 8 Delta X-Ray. I said, thank you very much, let you go. He said, no, what's your name? where are you? What are you doing? Where have you been? And you could hear the pile-up building. And then he went, and I thought he's had enough. And we carried on driving up the M6. We were going back to Wigan. And he came back. He said, G4NXG Mobile, are you still on frequency? I said, where'd you go? He said, oh, the lights went out in Phnom Penh, is it the capital? He said, I had to go and start a generator. What did you say? He said, and then I can hear this friend of mine, G4ZCG, going, Charlie Golf, because he lives in Preston, you know. And I said, could you call a friend of mine? I said, yeah. And these things that have happened, you know, I could talk for half an hour on that, Don. Yeah, thank you.
We'll have to. We'd love to hear you, Alan, but we need to move on. I remember the days of mobile rallies, and some of you will, where there were cars with great big things climbing out the back of them, top band verticals. That was what it was all about. But two things have changed. I think the electrics in cars, which you referred to, and safety when mobile, which is W6AM running a kilowatt operating CW going down the freeways of California. You won't get too much of that these days. Most of my mobile has been operating from cars on holiday, and you don't normally have a leisure battery, so I just park facing downhill and hope for the best. But let's thank Alan in the usual way.
Okay.